now I would like to introduce here Martin Vejmelka, who will host another panel. All good?
Yes, all good.
Perfect.
Carry on.
Good luck.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We're hosting a panel on MEV today, and with me I have Rafa Aviles from Numia. Rafa, it's in the front.
Is it last? Or?
Yeah, sit on. Sean Braithwaite from Mechatech. Sam Hart from Skip Protocol. And last but not least, Sunny Agarwal from Osmosis. So, hey guys, welcome. Excited to be here to talk about MEV. I have to admit, as a developer, when I heard about MEV the first time, I had this like sort of dark sci-fi ideas of like, validators meeting code developers in a dark alley. And the code developer's like, hey man, I know you're running this official image for the chain, but I've got this like fork, and it's going to make us bags of money if you deploy it. And I was like, how do these deals happen? Who knows? Like, who does MEV, who doesn't? Nobody knew at the beginning. But today we're in a much more sort of mature situation, and to boot we've got representatives from two major MEV tech developers, which is Sean and Sam, and then we've got a representative of the chain which generates most of the MEV, I think, today, and Rafa, the data man who understands where MEV happens inside the Cosmos. So let's kick it off. MEV, for those who haven't heard of the term before, maximal extractable value, is the value the block producer who's building this particular block that's going on-chain right now can extract from their ability to add or to insert, remove, or reorder transactions in the block on top of blockchain fees, right? So this power can be monetized, and that's what MEV is all about. So to kick things off, I'm very interested in what MEV looks like on Osmosis right now. Sonny, can you tell us what MEV markets are in operations? Are there different qualities of MEV? What does it look like?
Yeah, Tony, I feel the first time I heard about MEV was like selfish mining, because technically that was like the original MEV, and I remember reading that paper and I was like, whoa, Bitcoin is, like proof of work gets complicated, like the basic incentive systems are not what it actually is. Right. But anyways, in Osmosis, today there's like, so I mean, I like to categorize MEV in two large categories. One is what I call like, the type that's based off of other people's transactions, and then the other is the type that's based on the state of the world or the state of the blockchain. And so the type that's based on other people's transactions, that will include all sorts of things like, front-running, sandwiching people, back-running Oracle updates, these kinds of things. These are, you're reading other people's transactions and acting upon them. The other is, a liquidation. That's not, like, you don't need to read anyone else's transaction to know, maybe Oracle updates, right? Okay, we can talk about that, but like, doing a liquidation or doing an arbitrage against some external place, like, arbing Atom on Osmosis with Atom prices on Binance and Coinbase and stuff, whoever gets to be the first, like, you don't need to read what other people's transactions are. You just need to be the first in the block to get to do that arbitrage. And so our take in Osmosis has always been, let the former type, the one that's based off of other people's transactions, that's like fundamentally a privacy breach in our opinion. Like that is a bug in that the mempool is all public today and that like you can read everyone's transactions. So our solution there is to work on private mempools. So we designed and helped build this protocol called Fervio along with the Anoma team, and that basically will make it so we can encrypt the mempools themselves. So you can't read anyone else's transactions. Then on the other side, we have the other things that are not based off of reading other people's transactions, and that's we're working with Skip on a bunch of multiple different types of solutions to help solve those.
Yeah, thanks. Pretty interesting take. I haven't seen this division into sort of user facing or user affecting MEV versus sort of like whole blockchain MEV in some sense.
It's almost like user created MEV versus like world created.
Global state
global.
created MEV, right? I understand. So Rafa with us from Numia has done some work on analyzing MEV in the wider cosmos, I believe. Can you tell us like what MEV looks like right now and what you're expecting will happen in the near future?
Sure. So we're a data company in Cosmos, and we work with a bunch of customers here. And we've run some numbers to like look at the landscape of MEV. And in the categories that Sunny just described, I think we looked at 4 things, 2 of them in each of the 2 categories. First, like arbitraging, predominantly in osmosis. Just to give you some ideas, Osmo was like 90% of the arbitraging. In the last year, I think there were like 2 million Osmo in profit for arbitragers. Very interesting. It's a lot of money, actually. And I think the top 7 arbitragers make something like 70% of the profit. Like it's highly concentrated, for example. So that's very interesting. That to me is like what Sonny was mentioning is like the state of the blockchain and arbitrage, just seeing an opportunity, taking it, not messing with anybody's transactions. And in that same area, together with Mekatech, we looked at cross-chain MEV, and everybody keeps buzzing that around, and we looked at prices differences and how fast they were being closed across chains in Cosmos as a proxy for like market sizing the whole cross-chain MEV. And it turned out like if you for instance, we compared Canto, Chronos, Evmos to Osmosis and the price differences there. Canto and Chronos had more liquidity than Evmos, but the opportunity was only being taken between Evmos and Osmosis, interestingly enough. So the IBC volume ended up being much of a better predictor that there were going to be some cross-chain MEV than actually liquidity on the 2 ends of the chain, which is super interesting because to some degree, and I've heard the Skip team talking about this, like the IBC experience right now isn't great, and I don't think we're going to get anywhere with MEV cross-chain if that isn't the case. So that was kind of like refuted by those numbers. And then finally, we looked into sandwiching as well in Osmosis. That one was tricky, to be honest, because and maybe something, when you look at the numbers, you have to have a sort of a specific definition about what you're looking at. And sandwiching is to somehow specific, but what we found out in Osmosis was like some people were getting sandwiched unintentionally by like high frequency trading. But like you could go into some debate if that's actually trading or not. But to some degree, the slippage of the trader is getting affected. Maybe not to a maximum degree, but to some. So if you account for that too, there is some sandwiching, but it's very little. We weren't able to really go super deeply and identify where there was an intention and where there wasn't. But I think that raises a question in the numbers that it's not just about like how much somebody's extracting, but also how much a user might be losing unintentionally by some other activity. And finally, the last thing we looked at is if there's some sort of like just-in liquidity in Osmosis, like somebody getting into a pool and exiting after a high trade in the same block. We looked at, I think, 2 million LP transactions, and we saw nobody doing it so far. So that, even in Ethereum, we look at some numbers, and it seems to be very rare. So in that specific subset of MEV, we're not really seeing much activity right now.
Interesting, thanks. So like, given the state of this, I mean, I'm going to use the opportunity of having the 2 tech developers building new MEV products here. What are you guys focusing on most? Where do you think priorities lie for like your offering or your ideas? I'd like to start with Sean.
So I think it's like interesting that we have some concrete numbers. So we have like the theoretic arguments that like it's a privacy issue, it's leaked by users, they should earn that. And then we have the empirical amount, like it's about 3 million per year, let's say on Osmosis, which is most of Cosmos. Yeah. And I think that like both Skip and Osmosis and Mekatech has probably spent more than that on labor in the past year. So actually the most extracted value is sort of this like nerd snipe that is sort of like convincing people that this is the most important issue when every time that we measure it, every time we zoom in, it's not really an issue. But the philosophical issue still remains. So like for Mekatech, we've always looked sort of neutrally.
But if I can interrupt you, so that's true now, right? But what do you think in like 3 years, 4 years? Is that still going to be the case?
So we looked at it during the Terra collapse, actually. we didn't limit it to, so I guess there's like two phases of Cosmos that I think Sunny tried to touch upon in his talk about the supernova earlier today, which is what was Cosmos like when there was like billions of liquidity and what is it like now? And actually the analysis that we did with Numia sort of covered that period, right? Especially for front running. So we had this thesis that like, the reason why there's no front running happening now, or there's no sandwich happening now, is just because it doesn't matter. It's just not worth it, right? So like maybe when it was worth it, it would happen. But that proved to be not true.
So I was doing. Okay, so back to your sort of, what is Mechatech focusing on in terms of, building out their product, building their offering? Like, do you?
Yeah. So just in general, Mechatech has always focused on the supply chain. So like we have a different perspective than Osmosis, obviously, that is really focused on what happens when things enter the mempool. We look at what happens in wallets. We look at what happens in relayers. We look at happen at all the intermediaries, right? And how do we move them around to provide a better user experience has always been Mechatech's focus. So we did something off-chain, right, similar to Skip. We did something on-chain, and now we're looking sort of like more like an aggregated market that will bring those together.
Can you sort of, explain your position, guys? What are you focusing on at Skip?
Yeah, we have come to a similar conclusion. The most important thing right now for MEV, but also for Cosmos as a whole, is creating an interchain economy that doesn't exist today. So in order for any MEV product business to make any sense, we need to grow the pie. So we are basically working on just some of the rough edges in the system itself. We're doing a lot of work on IBC. We're doing a lot of work on the transaction supply chain, but basically trying to make that more intelligible for application developers and users. Just as an example, you have to pay fees in the native token of every different chain. It means you need to have every different token. It just gets to be kind of a mess, and we can't really expect this.
It's good for Sunny because that's what you can get the tokens, right?
Well, I mean, potentially with Sunny's new product, but like today, users just get stuck like all the time, and yeah, that has really been our focus the last couple months, is just.
So that's super interesting. So
just to show that new product, it's called fee abstraction. It is a module that, so today in Osmosis, you can already pay your transaction fees in like many different tokens because we basically use the Osmosis on-chain prices, and then we, at the end of the day, we swap all the fees to Osmo. We basically built a module called fee abstraction that you can insert into any Cosmos chain, and it'll do the same thing. It'll use Osmosis TWAPs via interchain queries. You can now allow users to pay fees on your chain with USDC or Atom or Osmo or BTC, whatever you want, and then it will still swap it all to your chain's native token. So all the accrued transaction fees still lead to buy pressure of your native token as well. So
that sounds really good. I like the Osmosis UI. It's great fun. But when I'm testing our products on chain number 4, I'm going to swap again. Yeah, I can see that. It's very super helpful. So, but back to what you were saying, Sam. Basically, if I understand this right, you're now focusing on improving the ecosystem to grow it, so then MEV makes sense, it makes business sense. So that's a super interesting sort of take on how to succeed in MEV. First, improve the entire sort of undercarriage, so you have that. So, what exactly are you guys working on in this space?
A bunch of different things. So we are kind of working at several layers of the stack. We still offer MEV integrations into different chains. So if they want to run an auction either in protocol or out of protocol, we support that. But most recently, what we've been working on are basically just getting chains to add the packet forward middleware to their software. We are working on a service that basically does multi-chain routing. So it abstracts away a bunch of the complexity of IBC. Just as an example, so IBC paths are not fungible with each other. If you go from chain A to B to C, it is not the same as if you send a token from A to C directly. And users don't know about this. So it's applications need to kind of abstract away that functionality, and application developers don't really know about this. So we're doing a lot of education and creating some tooling that just makes this easier so that you can get from A to B with the token that you need, when you need it.
So another question that's in my mind is, what sort of chains are you guys focusing on now, and where are you testing? What are your targets? Start with you, Sam, maybe.
The chains that get the most usage, or that we anticipate getting the most usage, or where we're starting. So typically, where users want to go, kind of using a DEX, using a lending protocol. We think that liquid staking is going to be an important element in the ecosystem, and it's going to need to be a kind of intermediate route for a lot of tokens that are issued. So we're trying to just kind of tie those together and make sure that they have the basic building blocks that they need to make a kind of seamless cross-chain experience. It's going to take incremental steps to get there. We need to solve unwinding. We need to solve multi-chain fees. We need to create like abstraction libraries that make it so that you can do one-click signing to just send the token to where you want to go.
So Sean, what about you guys? Where are you sort of focusing your integration efforts?
We're looking outside of Cosmos. I think we're seeing a lot of growth in the L2 space and Arbitrum and Optimism. I think that what's super exciting to us, even like as I was talking with Mizaki about like sort of our bias towards IBC and this core tech stack that Cosmos has produced, and we're super passionate about it. In terms of users, we're just seeing growth elsewhere, so that's where we're focused. And I think that some of the growth trajectories that projects like Arbitrum and Optimism have gone through are going to be mirrored in some way, maybe improved upon in Cosmos later on. So we're trying to use those lessons to kind of like maybe bring that growth back to Cosmos.
As far as I know, if I'm a validator today, or even like if we'll get to governance later, if it's decided at protocol level, as far as I understand, like today I have to pick, I'm going to integrate a skip module, or I'm going to integrate like a Mechatech module in my validator. Do you guys foresee a future where I can sort of like run both solutions at the same time and just like auction off my block like among, is it possible to aggregate this? Like,
I think it's
are you guys thinking this way?
I think the integration points need to be standardized, whether that's POB or the builder module. I think like for Mechatech, we've open sourced everything, like both Zenith and the builder module, right, for chains to use, because that's not really sort of our core value proposition. That's just a utility to prevent spam, is kind of what we had in mind. And so I think the bigger question is like, in this future where you're looking, whether you call them searchers, executors, solvers, builders, or whatever, these off-chain actors, right? What interfaces do they use? What utility do they provide to the ecosystem? And then how do we, like, insofar as we need that market? So say the user experience is actually contingent on someone doing that, either like as a market maker or as a solver or whatever. Like, what are the interfaces that these people need to do their job to deliver a better user experience? Yeah,
whenever we're talking users and interfaces, I've heard the word intent repeated quite a bit, sometimes in conjunction with MEV. Can you explain the connection there? What do you guys see?
So I don't want to like front run my talk, which I feel like Sunny already did, because it's like only in 2 hours.
MEV during the conference.
I think we can wait. But broadly, I think it's like a lot of the people who have been looking at these UX problems and looking at MEV as sort of like a misexpressed preference by a user. So like if you think about like slippage tolerance or whatever, like the user's actually like saying yes to that trade. They're accepting that, but do they know what they're doing? And is that what they need to do is a question, has raised all these questions about like whether transactions are the right primitive, right, for users interacting. Maybe it's the right primitive for executing on a blockchain, but not the right one for a user creating. And so this is bringing up this question of intention.
Would you agree with that, Sam? Sort of jibe with what your view is?
Yeah, we were chatting about this a little bit before. I mean, it's kind of a new name for an old topic to some extent. So there are intent systems that have been in production for many, many years. Chris Goes, who started Anoma, an intent project, and is the kind of author of most of the IBC spec, worked on a protocol called Wyvern that powered OpenSea for many years. And that used a system of off-chain partial transactions that could be filled by a third-party intent system. So if you've used OpenSea, you've used an intent system before. intent systems are, allow for a certain degree of flexibility, which is why I think people are interested in them now. It basically says, because it's a partial transaction, you're saying that this could actually be completed in a number of different ways. And that parameterization may allow for additional fill quality or for one or another DEX to be plugged in, something like that. But that also comes, as Sean was mentioning, like slippage in some ways in intent. So if you don't have the market structure kind of aligned with the intent, then you're going to get the worst fill possible. So this is kind of the cutting edge of research right now, is how do you specify the correct intents and the correct market structure so that you can actually do, you don't get the worst possible fulfillment of that intent.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that I think is interesting about MEV, like there's been a lot of tech development, a lot of sort of research, but a major question is of governance, right? So who decides what modules can exist on a chain? Like, is it the validators? Should this be decided at the blockchain level? Who are the stakeholders who should have some say? So I'm interested in like all of your views on this. So maybe start with Sunny.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day on Osmosis, it's mostly the Osmos stakers have a governance system that they use and have the final say. Obviously, like, the dev team has like some level of say, but at the end of the day, we are subject to whatever Osmosis governance chooses.
So you float a proposal. We're going to add this module to, and we're upgrading the chain. Like, do you guys agree? And after that, okay.
Yeah.
And what about in terms of sort of markets, right? We talked about MEV with different quality. Let's say these sandwiching, front running, or other types of transactions. Like, do you think governance should also discuss this, or is it free for all?
So what do you mean by that?
No, I mean like so the modules that you integrate, they could somehow limit certain types of transactions. Say, okay, those are not okay on this chain, right? So you could sort of avoid having them. Do you think stakeholders should also decide that, and you want to pass this through governance?
Yeah. I think that like it should be up to Osmos stakers to like you can put in certain sorts of. One of the things that's going to happen with ABCI++ is the ability to reorder transactions in a block. So instead of just like executing things in the order that they're included in a block, the state machine itself can make more. One of the things that Skip is working on this is this idea of transaction lanes. And so you can have the state machine be more opinionated about like, oh, okay, we're going to execute all the liquidity adds at the beginning of the block, then do the swaps, and then do the liquidity removals, for example. And yeah, that would be something that's up to Osmosis governance to like, make its own decision of, in the long term, is this value additive to Osmosis? Like, is it going to bring in, is this user safety going to end up bringing in more volume and users to Osmosis or not?
So how do you guys think about your products in terms of configurability, right? If the stakeholders want to have this decision power, obviously the tech has to somehow support this. So what are you guys building features in this respect? Are you guys researching, when you're partnering with chains, like what conditions do you guys have to integrate us? Is that a conversation that's active?
No, that's what the builder module does. It allows you to specify what, like at that. So I guess what Sunny was alluding to is like the way like most Cosmos chains work are in these stages, like proposal, pre-commit, and commit. And like the proposer has one idea for what the next block should be, and then the other validators have an opinion, right? And so the question is like, what should their opinion be? Like at what point should the validators be like, I don't like this order? Should they like be informed of MEV and like and who gets it? So I think like both of us have different, Skip and Mekatech have different both perspectives and solutions to this problem, right? One with POB and the other with the builder module. And for us, like, yeah, I think the chain is inevitably going to decide, which is kind of like, maybe that's an interesting conversation, but I think the more interesting conversation is like, what do you do with the proceeds and then how do you govern it? Like, one of the problems that we typically have with governance is people don't vote for new taxes, or like people don't vote to tax themselves, right? I think it's typically okay to tax other people, but it's really, really hard for people to like self-tax, to admit that they need to pay for this service or this infrastructure, even this society that supports them.
Absolutely. So, Sean, Sarah, Sam, what's your take? So, Sean already mentioned you guys are working on POB, protocol builders. Can you explain, what that is, how that contrasts to the builder module?
They're similar in a lot of ways. It's basically creates an interface for an off-chain interaction. So I guess it's just maybe important to back up. Like, why are we talking about governance? It's because we care about the protocol and like actually the MEV supply chain. A lot of the off-chain actions are part of the protocol. They're just the kind of invisible parts of the protocol. So my kind of view on governance is very similar to protocol governance. There is a kind of equilibrium that's created by the stakers, or the delegators, the validators, the core team, the clients actually. So you could do a soft fork via a client. That equilibrium that is salient to the protocol is salient to the MEV supply chain as well. There are ways to kind of introduce or subtract certain actors using protocol interfaces like POB, but ultimately, like it's part of the node and is subject to the same protocol governance considerations.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys have an opinion about how to effectively use sort of MEV rewards or the proceeds? How should these be distributed? Obviously, there's one answer where, governance should decide. But how would you design this in your own mind if you had your favorite scenario? Like you've got this MEV, you can extract on chain, and what are you going to do with that?
I think the best thing would be public goods for like infrastructure to like grow the pie. That'd be the
So
ideal.
you put all of the MEV rewards
Yeah,
to that.
I'd put all the whole thing.
Wow.
Like say there's a spectrum. Like one idea is like you burn it.
Okay.
You just burn it, which is like essentially a subsidy to all token holders,
Right.
whether they are passive, whether they lost their account, whether they've ever contributed at all, right? Or like indiscriminately based on the person, you give them a subsidy.
Right.
And on the other extreme, right, is invest in the most productive labor, right, that grows the protocol. I think that's the ideal. That's like where we've always wanted to go, but it's actually super hard because of the supply chain.
Okay, that's a bold vision in my mind. Like how to use those MEV. Do you guys agree? Would you like that, or is that do you have a different scenario in mind?
I mean, I take kind of an agnostic view to it. Like protocols and those communities should figure out how they want to use those resources, and we build tools that allow for that. Kind of tangentially, I think a domain of super interesting research is like intentionally inducing MEV in order to execute a certain function. This is kind of related to the intent conversation, but not quite. So, if you put a penny on the ground as a user, like somebody's going to pick it up, and if you actually like want to, that third party to do something for you, you can actually you can be intentional about that. So there's ways to actually just improve the experience and get a kind of richer feature set out of an intentional fee payment or MEV cost that's borne by the user or the system.
So is that also like your position, or how would you do that on Osmosis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll probably be a split between like revenues to stakers versus going into a community pool and for public good stuff. The Osmosis Osmo 2.0 tokenomics are coming, which is like going to be cutting inflation by like 2/3, and basically, with contrary liquidity and order books, like the idea is that like the Osmo liquidity incentives should be able to go down significantly, and also staking rewards should eventually be replaced by this like real yield coming from two main sources, right? Which is trading fees and the MEV revenue. And so, the point of holding of staking the Osmo is that like you'll get the return. At the end of the day, there needs to be some protocol revenue. So I think there's a proposal up on Commonwealth today about like trading fees on Osmosis and like adding a protocol fee and how to what proportion to split that in with the community pool versus stakers.
All right. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. This was a super interesting conversation. Was excited to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you.